Look, I called him Governor Trudeau because they should be the 51st state, really. It would make a great state, and the people of Canada like it.
Now, for the first time, many Canadians are seriously considering the possibility of it. One thing about Trump is that he is the prime candidate to exemplify American hubris. America can say and do whatever it wants, because it can, without consequences. I believe Trump doesn't really lie except for his personal stuff. Professionally, as the president, he's really bad at keeping secrets. He'll just let out plans and doctrines that shouldn't really be discussed by any country's leaders, let alone the US. And so we just get to hear things that should be secrets, or we hear his bad interpretations.
We're going to do very well. I think really very well. Marco just gave me a note. Go back to Chevron. They want to discuss something. Go ahead. I'm going back to Chevron.
Russia and China get far more respect from the US, from Trump, because they're strong, because they're powerful. Venezuela, Cuba, Iraq, Afghanistan, these countries don't get that respect, just like Canada isn't. And you know why? Because the US knows that it is far more powerful and superior to Canada. And so it does not get that level of respect, even if Canadians like to see themselves as America's biggest allies. Though once he made comments like, taking over Canada and Greenland, there were some articles and commentary about, well, is this possible? Now, the American conservative side, they definitely think it's possible, it should be done. But we also have a Canadian defense analyst writing a piece, and I'd like to read a bit for you. So Mr. Kagustan over here says that it's very improbable that the US will invade Canada. And the main reason that he gives is that there's NATO and that it's going to be economically painful for the US to do so. To this article, I would say this whole concept of it being economically painful for the Americans is not really a matter of concern. If the Iran war has shown us anything, the American elite do not care about short-term pain, economic hardship, recessions, nothing like that. What truly matters is the fact that will the Americans out-survive the pain caused to the Canadians? And that is a resounding yes. See, in 2016, I first came across this possibility of the US invading Canada. The idea was simple. Going into the future, global warming and such, the US will run out of fresh water, or it'll start to. And then, in order to sustain its agriculture, it would need fresh water from Canada. It has the largest reserve on the continent. Now, you could have very aggressive trade policies and get as much water as you want out of Canada, or you could just walk in. And walking in also gives you access to the mines and oil that is in Canada, as well as access to the Arctic. And the Arctic has even more undiscovered resources that will be taken advantage of in the coming decades. So getting into Canada is very beneficial for America in the long run. We recently saw the trade war happen between the US and Canada, right? Tariffs being thrown to renegotiate tariffs again, and then they come back down. You would say nothing happened, but I would say it was a test of strength. See, Canada found itself heavily relying on the US. Canada already doesn't have a resilient economy. It's going into hyper-capitalism, and it's very unproductive right now. It's heavily leaning into services and resource extraction that directly get put back into the US. So the Canadian economy, if you look at their imports and exports, heavily rely on the US itself. So if the US does even something similar to what it did with Cuba, it just refuses to trade with Canada. Will Canada even survive? Can it survive? Can it even function without the US? See, in times of crisis, real estate agents and banks do not add resilience or productivity to the economy. They just churn money around and inflate the value of assets. But that is not going to be helpful once there is the economic turmoil with the US. And we're just speaking economically. Now, Canadians might say we have our own resources and economies, we can work with those. But if you look at what even the ownership structure is for a lot of our industries, well, there's definitely a lot of foreign ownership, a lot of American ownership, and so much so that it's very hard to find data on how much of it. But you just have to take a good look at the mines, at the refineries, and you'll find a lot of it is American. And this would again be a leverage that the US will have on Canada. Even without external pressures, the Canadian economy is struggling. They're bringing in a lot of immigrants right now. It's a more complex topic to talk about separately, but one thing Canadians are currently struggling with is identity. See, most Canadians don't really call themselves Indigenous, right? They don't have an Indigenous identity. A lot of Indigenous people themselves don't have a lot of their culture left intact, thanks to colonial Canada. But then we have immigrants coming in, and they're from all over the place, but heavily from India. And a lot of Canadians, or I would say most Canadians, don't resonate with that either. In fact, a lot of those immigrants will eventually become part of the broader Canadian culture. But that Canadian culture itself heavily relies on American culture. See, a lot of the movies and celebrities, a lot of the politics is just copy-pasted or used as a substitute by the Canadians. Canadians watch more American politics than they do Canadian. Religion, politics, celebrities, it's all copy-paste. Remember COVID? The conservatives in the US had a song and dance when it came to masks and vaccines. Trump was hoping to get the vaccines out in time before he left office, so he said, hey, masks are for idiots. You'll get a jab. And instead, he couldn't get the jab. So then the Conservative Party switched. It was like, all right, no, vaccines aren't good either. No masks, no vaccines, just raw dog the pandemic. What about Canadians? The Canadian Conservative Party copy-pasted the rhetoric. And you'll find the same thing happen, especially with the Conservatives, who are the major opposition. They just copy-paste the politics. They do not even have their own original ideas, which I would argue traditional conservatism really is needed for Canada and its economic growth. But you don't see that. What you see is just a copy-paste of what's happening in America. You want to wonder what's happening on the Christian front, on the immigrant front, on the celebrity front, on the public consumption front? Photocopy. So the Canadian culture, the Canadian identity heavily overlaps with the Americans, and that means there are people who sympathize just as much with America as they do with Canada. That brings me to a country's favorite people, separatists. See, Canada has separatists, and they're in the state of Alberta. Oil, America, match made in heaven. This guy, definitely not Alex Jones, is called Jeff Ratt, legal counsel to the Alberta Prosperity Project. And he is one of their leaders, a group of far-right separatists who want the province of Alberta to become independent. And who do you think they go and meet? The US. And they're actually asking for a $500 billion credit facility in the case the province does become independent. And they say that the US is extremely enthusiastic about a free and independent Alberta. He claimed he had a much stronger relationship with the Trump administration than the Canadian Prime Minister. Now, this would all be fun and games if the Americans did not entertain them, but they did. Trump himself entertained these people and directly met with them. And what does that show you? That shows you there's a separatist movement within Canada that is directly being funded or supported by the US. The US wants Canada to break up. Now, unlike the uprisings in South America or the Arab Spring in the Middle East, this operation will be far more easier for the CIA to execute, daring Canada from within. And put it all together, when the US decides to take over Canada, it can cripple Canada economically, it can break it from within, and it doesn't even have to march that far. And what does it get? Decades of prosperity in the future. Which is why I don't agree with the sentiment that the short-term pain that the US might feel by going to war with Canada is going to really be a matter of concern. Of course, the article did mention NATO, but NATO will never stand up against the US. They won't go to war with the US, and the US plans to pull out of NATO anyways. So will NATO survive? What if NATO is like, you know what, without the Americans, we don't really have to keep fighting Russia. Let's just get into a partnership and call it a day. Now, how things will play out, I don't know. But what I hope I have shown you is that when the US decides to, it can easily do so. Don't look at Trump. Look at the country itself. Look at the foreign policy, the elite, the group of people who are there. Trump might not survive 2026, but Vance will be right next. And he is far more smarter, far more cunning, and he will not have the goofs and gaffes that Trump does. He has far more charisma on stage. He can unite the voter base far better and execute far more concisely. And if you're still debating, well, okay, but will they? I want you to watch this before I leave you.
That is why President Trump has drawn a new strategic map from Greenland to the Gulf of America to the Panama Canal and its surrounding countries. At the Department of War, we call this strategic map the Greater North America.